My buddy and I were talking the other day about how video games have, we think, ultimately greater potential for storytelling than film. The big argument for reading books, for instance, versus watching movies, besides the fact obviously that books have more overall content since movies have to cut things down for time, is that reading is an active process. You're the one scanning from one word to the next word and making sense of it. It's up to you to keep the story going. You invest more in it, and it becomes more precious to you because of that. While watching a movie is a passive act, you hit play and you just sit there. It comes at you regardless of your level of engagement and doesn't require anything from you in order for the story to unfold. This is, of course, not to say that movies are bad. We've all been terrified, moved to tears, and broken down laughing from them. But when you consider the pros and cons of both mediums, you realize video games bring both sets of those pros together. Playing a video game is an active process. You could easily argue even more so than reading. You more or less control what happens when and how. And even if a plot in a video game takes one linear path, the fact that you're the one pushing it forward tends to make it far more compelling and immersive. For instance, if you saw the brothers A Tale of Two Sons play through Max and I did on the Fave Bros, if that same scene that had given me chills and moved me to tears had played out in a movie, I probably would have just, sat there and not really cared. But the simple use of the controller in which the player does literally control the scene and the characters, it teleports you right into the minds of the characters and makes it a much more intimate experience. That being said, world-expanding secrets and shared universes, for me, are also far more eye-opening in video games than in films or novels. Usually when we come across them in films, it's a pretty harmless Easter egg that does nothing to really propel the story forward or change the world in any way, but it's just fun and exciting because you're seeing something from a different universe that you're familiar with, nonetheless. But they do have the potential to be way more impactful and bring an entirely new layer to a story. So here's a look at my two absolute favorite secretly shared universes. If you haven't played What Remains of Edith Finch, I highly recommend it if you're into narrative-driven indie games. On a very basic level, it's about a supposedly cursed family called the Finches. We play as Edith Finch, the last living member, as she walks around the old bulbous family estate looking for clues as to how each family member passed away. When you enter each family member's room, you find out how they died and experience their final moments in a flashback. So it's a pretty dark game. One of the flashbacks is straight up a baby drowning in a bathtub, and yes, you play as the baby. And another one is about a guy who's lived with agoraphobia his whole life, and one day he finally gets the courage to go outside and is immediately hit by a train. So some are straightforward, others are shrouded in fantasy and have to be inferred, but they all surely end in death. Except one. And I'll admit, when I first played this game, I played through the part I'm about to get into, and I was just mildly confused and forgot about it fairly quickly. But when I took the time to figure out what was actually going on my second time around, I was blown away. So the team that made What Remains of Edith Finch is called Giant Sparrow. In 2012, 5 years before Edith Finch, they made a game called The Unfinished Swan. In The Unfinished Swan, you play as a young boy whose mother has just passed away. The boy's mother was a painter, and though she painted a lot, she never actually finished anything. The boy is sent to an orphanage, and from his mother's paintings, he chooses one of a swan to keep with him in his new home to remember her. But one day, the swan magically escapes from the painting, and he chases after it, only to fall into the painting himself. So you have to traverse a blank canvas by using ink blots to find your way around. Eventually you find a lonely king, who you discover is the original artist who created his painted world, and you discover that he actually painted your mother too. Your mother, the queen, at some point separated from the king and left the painting for the quote-unquote real world, where she then conceived the boy. So some people have theorized that Milton Finch had schizophrenia and the entirety of The Unfinished Swan is his near-death hallucination. But his body was never found. He really is missing. He's the only character in the game without a death date. Also, the creative director of Unfinished Swan literally said in an interview that, I quote, "It's not a dream, there is a door. He walks into it, there's a world that exists on its own." The painted world is not a metaphor, it's a literal, tangible, magical, alternate reality. So while this insane and supposedly cursed family is getting picked off one by one, this unassuming little kid draws himself into another dimension and makes himself the king of it. To me, that's pretty cool. Shadow of the Colossus is the first truly emotional game I ever played. I saw a bit of it being played at a friend's house, and I wanted it because I loved the visuals and the soundtrack, and I wanted to fight these giant beasts, and it just looked like a cool, epic game to a 12-year-old. I had no idea it would be the first game to bring me to tears. It's about a young man who makes a deal with these godlike phantom entities. The initial plot is very straightforward. They instruct him to kill 16 colossi that are scattered throughout the land. In exchange, they'll bring the girl he loves back to life. Little does he know, the souls of the mischievous entities were actually trapped in the bodies of the numerous colossi that wander in a distant land where they can do no harm to humans. So each time he kills one of the things, he's actually releasing its soul and becoming possessed by it. Each time you kill one, you get more and more disheveled and possessed. A shaman from the young man's village, however, was on to what he was doing and comes to stop him. Of course, they arrive when it's too late, and the ritual is complete once the player has defeated all the colossi. The young man becomes assimilated with these demonic ghosts and becomes a colossi himself. The shaman uses a powerful spell that banishes the demon to oblivion, and what's heartbreaking is that the soul of the young man is still very much present, because it then tasks the player with hopelessly trying to reach the girl who is still dead. So the whole thing appears as one big sham, and this poor guy took the bait. But when it looks like everything is over, the girl finally wakes up. She walks up to where the spell was cast and finds a baby with horns laying on the ground. This is presumably a reincarnation of the young man, now bearing horns because his blood is fused with that of demons. Now, the shaman says before he leaves the now sealed off land, if you somehow made it out, and if it is even possible to live in these cursed lands, I hope you find atonement for what you've done. That is a direct reference to the game Ico, which is a game made by the same company exactly 4 years before Shadow of the Colossus. Ico is all about defeating these dark phantoms and escaping a castle with a girl who bears striking resemblance to the girl in Shadow of the Colossus. Obviously it has to be a different girl, but maybe it's her daughter, we don't know. Either way, spiritually, this guy gets a second shot. He not only does atone for his mistake by defeating the demons that tricked him, but he finally, at least on a metaphysical level, gets the girl he loves. Each game is beautiful, moving, and profound on its own, but when you realize how they relate to each other, it really becomes something special. When looking at both of these sets of games side by side, Team Ico's games and Giant Sparrow's games, I realized that obviously the games on their own are very tragic. They're all marinated in melancholy and loneliness and defeat, but as soon as you connect them, there's suddenly a tremendous amount of hope. You realize that the young man from Shadow of the Colossus ultimately redeems himself and gets the girl. You realize that Milton escapes his cursed family and built himself a long, happy life. And discovering the triumph and happiness that's hiding in plain sight among all this sorrow is very compelling. As you guys probably know, I'm a huge fan of narrative-driven games, and my hat goes off to the teams for not only making 2 great standalone games, but managing to subtly and tastefully connect them in ways that not only enhance what are already masterpieces, but reward the player for playing both games purely through story.